A black pastor vanished after a sermon. 28 years later, his bag and robe were found in a collapsed cave. He walked in a hollow rock cave to pray and vanished without a trace. Nearly 3 decades later, a single stained robe and a battered leather satchel would shatter an entire town's secrets. Welcome back to Minority Struggles, where we uncover the stories they hoped you'd never hear. Today, we dive into the chilling disappearance of Pastor Alistair Finch and the bone-chilling discoveries that followed. Before I begin, thank you for watching Minority Struggles. Let me know in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? It really means a lot to know you're here with us, sharing in these stories. We're in this together. Now, let me tell you what really happened. June 12th, 1988, dawns over Sand Rock, Alabama, with a fragile hush settling across the red clay roads and moss-draped pines. At New Dawn Baptist Church, a modest white clapboard building perched on a gentle hillside, the congregation gathers in the early morning gloom. Inside the high-ceilinged sanctuary, wooden pews gleam under the glow of oil lamps, and an air of reverence drapes over every hymn and whispered prayer. 4-year-old Mariah Finch grips her mother's hand, her small fingers trembling as she watches the figures filing down the aisle in muted anticipation. Evelyn Finch, poised at the front of the choir loft, adjusts her sheet music with a practiced grace that belies her racing heart. She nods to the pianist, and the first notes of the opening hymn ripple through the room like a soft breeze stirring autumn leaves. By mid-morning, the sanctuary is alive with voices joined in praise. But the true draw today is Pastor Alistair Finch. At 35, he carries himself with quiet authority, his tall, lean frame draped in a charcoal gray suit tailored to hang perfectly off his broad shoulders. His dark eyes burn with conviction, and lines of compassion frame a smile that soothes troubled souls. In his leather satchel, he carries not only his well-worn Bible, but also a handheld PA recorder set to run continuously, capturing every inflection of his sermon and every murmur of response from the congregation. Evelyn watches him for the choir loft, pride and a hint of worry mingling in her chest as she thinks of the journey of faith they share and of the little girl clinging to her side. When the final hymn ends, Alistair steps forward beneath the stained glass window that bathes him in kaleidoscopic light. He raises his right hand, and the congregation falls silent. His voice, rich and resonant, fills every corner of the church as he speaks of justice, of protecting the innocent, and of shining God's light into the darkest places. His words carry weight beyond the wooden walls, sending ripples through a community grappling with loss and longing. He quotes scripture with fierce passion, reminding them that faith demands action, that mercy requires courage, and that evil cannot thrive where truth is proclaimed. As a sermon crescendos, his wife and daughter watch with rapt attention. Mariah's small face is upturned, her pale eyes wide with awe. Evelyn's chest tightens as she imagines the journey her husband will take after the service. To Hollow Rock Cave, a limestone cavern carved into an outcropping half a mile from the church, where Alistair often retreats to pray in solitude. She knows the cave's mouth is flanked by jagged boulders and that its interior passages twist like the veins of an old leaf. Forgetting to extinguish the PA recorder, he leaves it on the pulpit, a forgotten witness to whatever comes next. After the final amen, Alistair exchanges warm handshakes and embraces in the receiving line. He smiles at parishioners whose lives he has changed, offers quiet encouragement to the frail and the brokenhearted, and stoops to ruffle Mariah's curls. He feels the weight of responsibility in every touch, the weight of guiding lost souls and protecting the vulnerable. Then, with a nod to Evelyn, he slings the leather satchel over his shoulder, straightens the hem of his custom-stitched robe, and steps out into the brilliant sunshine. The walk to Hollow Rock Cave is a familiar pilgrimage, down a narrow trail thick with honeysuckle, past gnarled oaks that have stood watch for a century, to the yawning maw of stone. The cave entrance yawns like the mouth of some ancient beast, dark and silent. A gnawing solitude fills Alistair's chest as he crosses the threshold. He flips on his flashlight, the beam carving through swirling dust motes in the stale air, and advances into the cool shadow beyond. His boots echo against the stony floor as he pauses to remove the recorder's protective cap and set it on a flat rock near the entrance, its red recording light blinking steadily. Alistair feels the familiar chill seep into his bones. He tugs the robe tighter and grips his Bible in one hand, the worn leather cover smooth under his fingers. With deliberate reverence, he steps deeper into the cavern, following a ribbon of damp stone that slopes gradually downward. The silence here is so complete it presses against his eardrums, broken only by the soft drip of water somewhere ahead. Flicking his flashlight back and forth, he surveys the walls, noting ancient markings etched by time and water. He murmurs a prayer for guidance, for strength, for the courage to face whatever darkness lies ahead. Suddenly, the beam of his light catches something unfamiliar. Dark streaks smeared across the pale limestone, like dried tears of blood. He kneels, tracing the pattern with a gloved finger. The smears curve and twist, forming shapes that feel too intentional to be natural. He rises, heart pounding, and scans the narrow passage. Shadows shift at the edge of his vision, as though something lurks just beyond the reach of the light. He breathes deeply, reminding himself that this cave, though vast and mysterious, has never threatened him before. With resolve hardening in his chest, Alistair reaches into his satchel and pulls out a length of rope and a small trowel. He presses a handkerchief to his mouth, stifling a gasp as he recalls the missing children he referenced in a sermon. He knows their names by heart, names whispered by despairing parents, names that haunt him in the stillness of night. These walls could hold answers, or they could hide horrors beyond imagining. He sets the trowel down and flips the Bible open, letting the pages fall to a bookmarked passage, Psalm 23. He reads aloud, voice pitched low and steady, invoking comfort against fear. A sudden echo reverberates through the tunnel, the sound of stumbling footsteps on stone. Alistair freezes, heart thundering. He lifts his hand to call out, then lowers it, uncertain whether to speak or remain silent. The footsteps stop. A faint scuff echoes, and he feels the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He steadies his breath and whispers a prayer for protection. The light in his flashlight begins to flicker. He taps the side, willing it to stay alive, but the beam wanes, casting erratic shadows that dance against the walls. Panic flutters in his chest. He exhales slowly, summoning calm. He recalls every sermon he's delivered, every verse he's preached, every promise of God's unfailing presence. With a final prayer, he clicks the flashlight back on full power and advances toward the source of the scuffing sound. His footsteps reverberate in tight cadence, and each breath feels like a battle against rising dread. Then, just as he nears a fork in the tunnel where ancient carvings suggest human passage, the beam of his light cuts out completely. Alistair swears under his breath and slams the flashlight against his palm. He reaches into his satchel for replacement batteries, fumbling as his heart pounds. His fingers brush against the smooth leather of the recorder's case, an odd detail, but in that moment it reminds him of the tape waiting at the cave entrance. He inhales, pressing the back of his hand to his forehead. The scuffing sound has ceased. The silence returns, heavier than before. He stands still, senses straining to detect any movement. Then from behind his left shoulder, a low breath, too close, too deliberate to be his own. His skin prickles with alarm. He grabs the rope and pulls it free, looping it around his right arm like a lifeline, while his left hand seeks comfort in the familiar weight of his Bible. He opens it to the Psalms again, readying himself for whatever comes next. He channels every ounce of faith he possesses into one thought: God, be with me. His final words drift back to the entrance, captured forever on the PA tape humming beneath the morning sun. They know I saw them. Help me. The dawn after Pastor Finch's disappearance arrives with a sense of stunned disbelief that hangs over Sand Rock like heavy fog. Word spreads through the quiet streets before first light. A whisper here, a worried gesture there, that something terrible has happened. By mid-morning, the church lawn has become a makeshift command post. Sheriff's deputies fan out in sharp navy uniforms, clipboard in hand, while volunteers from neighboring farms and families gather at the cave entrance, faces pale with concern. Evelyn Finch stands at the edge of the crowd, Mariah pressing against her side, wide-eyed and clutching a hand-sewn doll. Every time someone points toward the dark cave mouth, a tremor runs through Mariah's small frame. Evelyn forces a steady smile and motions for her daughter to take comfort in a nearby blanket spread of toys and water jugs. Deputy Marcus Caldwell, 28 and newly assigned to Jackson County, takes charge of the first formal search. He organizes teams into shifts, pairing seasoned cave divers with local outdoorsmen who know the terrain. By mid-afternoon, ropes and pulleys snake into the cavern entrance. A group of volunteers lowers lamps and lanterns, their beams bobbing through the gloom. Somewhere deep inside, the echo of dripping water and distant scuffing makes hearts race. Caldwell watches each diver disappear beyond the threshold with a mixture of hope and dread. He jots down the time, the order of descent, and the name of each volunteer. Every few minutes he raises an anxious eyebrow at his sergeant, scanning for signs of success. Reporters crouch nearby, their notebooks poised, but so far there is nothing to record. As hours pass, every explored tunnel seems blocked by fresh rockfalls. At first, searchers blame natural instability, loose shale and crumbling limestone. Then a miner-turned-diver notices that the collapse patterns look deliberate. Wedges of stone that appear pried into place, surfaces too clean to be random. Caldwell listens as the veteran points out angular breaks and rebar clips still embedded in the rock. The sheriff's office radios buzz with speculation. Rumors drift back to the church lawn that someone is re-bricking the passages from within, as though hiding a secret beyond the reach of search teams. Volunteers exchange uneasy glances, and at least one man offers a prayer that these are honest mistakes rather than deliberate obstructions. By late afternoon, word circulates of hooded figures spotted near the cave mouth at dawn and dusk. A teenage farmhand swears he saw two silhouettes slipping away in gray robes. An elderly woman swears she heard chanting echoing through the trees at night. Cousins whisper of rituals under moonlight. The air shifts in temperature as if the forest itself holds its breath. When Caldwell gathers his deputies, he orders constant perimeter patrols. No civilian allowed near the entrance after sunset. Yet by the time night falls, a handful of brave souls remain behind the yellow tape, candles flickering in the darkness. They pray aloud for the pastor's safety, voices rising in trembling unison, hoping he might hear them somewhere in the labyrinth. Inside New Dawn Baptist, Evelyn Finch fights to maintain a sense of normalcy for her daughter. Choir practice that afternoon feels like a lifeline. She hands Mariah a hymnal, guiding her small hands to the right page. The piano notes ripple through the sanctuary, but each chord carries a hollow echo. Parishioners file in quietly, settling onto pews that feel too wide without Alistair in the pulpit. Evelyn lifts Mariah onto a choir stool and hums the melody until tears fill her own eyes. She doesn't know if her husband will ever return, but she clings to the routine they built, the harmonies they shared, to anchor her daughter's frightened heart. Mariah presses her cheek into Evelyn's elbow, her voice barely above a whisper, but she tries to sing every note, finding brief comfort in the familiar words. Back at the cave, search efforts resume at first light the next day. Caldwell oversees fresh excavation plans, bringing in engineers to reinvestigate the apparent rockfalls. They unroll blueprints of the cave's known passages and mark every collapsed section. Heavy machinery grinds at the edges of the sinkhole above the sealed side shaft. Yet each time a group clears rubble, fresh debris slides down to refill the gap. At day's end, Caldwell reviews photographs with a geologist. The pattern of bracing beams, the placement of intact stone slabs. The geologist leans close and mutters, "This wasn't natural. Someone built these barriers." Caldwell nods grimly and radios for a forensic team to collect soil and tool impressions. Deep beneath the surface, the conspirators orchestrate each setback. Two deacons from New Dawn, men praised in public for their piety, meet clandestinely at a derelict barn on the outskirts. The county coroner joins them under a single lamp, maps of the cave spread across a dusty table. Their hushed tones carry the weight of long-kept secrets. "The next rite must remain unseen," the coroner warns, tapping a weathered finger on the blueprint. They agree to collapse the eastern tunnel by nightfall, using borrowed tools under the guise of road repairs. They speak of the pastor's interruption 18 years ago and how his disappearance must never spark questions that draw too close to home. That night, the shuttering of passages continues. The conspirators work with chilling efficiency, bracing beams and chiseling loose rock. In the cold air outside, Caldwell's deputies spot glinting lights and hear the distant scrape of metal. They radio for backup, but by the time they reach the source, the workers merely wave and insist they're municipal contractors repairing a cave entrance. No badges verify their claim. The deputies exchange puzzled looks and retreat. The conspirators slip away into shadows, their faces hidden beneath rough hoods, blending with the trees. Weeks pass with no sign of Pastor Finch. The initial fervor of the search gives way to fatigue and frustration. Volunteers dwindle in number as crops need tending and weeknight labors return. Troopers scale back their shifts, focusing on record-keeping rather than new digs. At New Dawn, choir practice shrinks to a handful of faithful singers. Evelyn teaches alone now, the hymnal's pages growing dog-eared from her daughter's anxious fingers. Mariah has stopped reading the bold verses. She stands silently by the organ, hands folded in prayer. The sandbox and dolls at the church entrance remain untouched, gathering dust beneath a canopy of wilted flowers. In Sandrock, life resumes its rhythms, but the cavern remains an abyss of unanswered questions. Every whispered rumor, every collapsed tunnel, and every unexplained sighting fuels a collective dread that settles over the community like a storm cloud. Parents hug their children tighter at bedtime. Town councils debate restrictions around the cave, and local preachers add cautionary tales to their sermons. Yet no one dares venture beyond the entrance after dark. For Evelyn and Mariah Finch, every dawn brings another day without Alistair. Inside the house they shared, Mariah wraps herself in the hem of his custom robe, breathing in its familiar scent and hoping somehow that her father might still hear her calls across the years. In April 2016, a sinkhole opened without warning just above a long-sealed side shaft of Hollow Rock Cave. The ground collapsed in a half-circle of dirt and rock, spilling debris down into the hidden chamber. News of the sinkhole reached Auburn University, where Dr. Roscoe Jenkins, a cave geologist, was in the middle of a field study. He packed his gear and drove through winding back roads at dawn, guided by the first light filtering through pine branches. When he arrived at the site, he found a swirl of reporters, deputies, and frightened volunteers gathered at the edge of the crater. The air smelled of damp earth and old limestone. Jenkins checked his instruments, clipped on a headlamp, and fitted a safety harness. He made a mental note of every detail visible at the surface before stepping over fallen boulders and lowering himself into the yawning mouth of the cave. Jenkins dropped 20 feet along the rope into a low gallery littered with broken rock. He could hear the distant drip of water echoing through the tunnels. As he advanced, his light swept over smooth walls scored by centuries of flowstone and over piles of rubble that smelled faintly of must and decay. He followed the map he carried, a hand-drawn sketch of the original passages that had been sealed after the first search 30 years earlier. The shaft itself was narrow but stable. Jenkins paused halfway down to test the rock walls for weakness and to mark each foot of descent with fluorescent chalk. He moved slowly, aware that a single misstep could send loose stones cascading back to the entrance. The hush of the cave pressed in around him, broken only by the rasp of his breathing. When Jenkins reached the chamber beyond the sinkhole, he shone his light on a scene that made his pulse race. Draped over a makeshift altar of bone fragments and animal feathers lay a robe made of heavy fabric, darkened by age and stained in places that looked like blood. Next to it lay a leather sermon bag torn at the seams, its strap looped around a jagged rock as if it had been set there deliberately. Beside the bag, Jenkins spotted the church PA recorder still ticking softly, its red light blinking in the dim. He knelt to examine the robe's hem and found a small child's handkerchief embroidered with initials he did not recognize. Jenkins knew immediately that he had stumbled on something beyond geology. He snapped photographs from multiple angles, noting the exact position of every item and the pattern of dust on their surfaces. Then he carefully lifted the recorder, the robe, and the bag into his arms, securing each to his harness. Back at the surface, Jenkins climbed from the chamber, carrying the evidence like a sacred charge. A pair of deputies held flashlights to light his path. Each time he passed a reporter, he offered only a solemn shake of his head. At the lip of the sinkhole, Sheriff's Deputy Marcus Caldwell stepped forward, eyes wide with anticipation. Jenkins presented each item to Caldwell, who wore gloves and a face set in grim concentration. "This belongs in the cold case files," Jenkins said, voice echoing across the crater. Caldwell nodded and reached for his evidence kit. He labeled each piece with date, time, and location, then placed them in number evidence bags. The robe, the sermon bag, and the PA recorder were sealed in clear plastic and tagged with official stickers. Caldwell checked every label twice before clipping the bags into a locked briefcase. Later that afternoon, Caldwell drove back to Jackson County Sheriff's Office with Jenkins riding shotgun. They kept the briefcase on the seat between them as they crisscrossed farmland and pine woods. Jenkins described how he had found the items, and Caldwell jotted notes in a worn leather logbook. When they arrived at the station, a chain of custody form waited on a metal desk. Caldwell signed his name under the Georgia American Standard Time stamp, then handed the briefcase to an evidence technician who placed it in the steel locker. The locker door clanged shut with a finality that seemed to echo down the corridor. Jenkins watched the technician spin the dials of the combination lock and slip the key into a drawer marked case number 1988-03-284. Word of the discovery reached the front page of the Northeastern Alabama Gazette that evening. Reporter Simone Turner had been covering the cave since the sinkhole appeared. She arrived at the station just before closing time and caught sight of Caldwell emerging from the archives corridor. She asked coaxing questions through a mic clipped to her lapel while a photographer angled his camera for a shot of the evidence locker. Simone smelled the hint of antiseptic in the air and felt her pulse quicken when she saw the clerk open the case and lay the stained robe across a white table. Before the technician could close the door, Simone snapped photos of each item, capturing the frayed edges and the recorder's blinking light. She scribbled every detail in her notebook, aware that this was the story that could redefine her career. That night, Simone locked herself in her office and pored over the rough transcript of her interview with Caldwell. She typed a draft that described how a cave geologist's descent had unearthed 3 artifacts linked to the pastor's vanishing. She included quotes from Jenkins about the bloodstains and from Caldwell about the sacred chain of custody. At nearly midnight, she sent the copy to her editor and fell asleep in her chair, the glow of the computer screen still humming. The Gazette staff worked through the night to lay out the front page. Early the next morning, the paper hit newsstands with a headline that read Minister's robe and bag discovered in cave after 28 years. The story carried photos of the robe draped on a table, the handkerchief and the battered bag, and a small image of the recorder's red light pulsing. Evelyn Finch learned of the discovery when a neighbor slipped a Gazette into her trembling hands before dawn. She sat on the edge of her bed wrapped in a quilt and studied the photos, each one familiar and yet impossibly distant. She saw the robe she had sewn for Alistair with her own hands and the bag he had carried every Sunday. Her heart clenched when she recognized a recorder she had meant to collect but had forgotten in the hurry of preparing the choir loft. She called Mariah to her side and pointed at the image of the PA recorder blinking in the dim light of the cave. Mariah ran a finger across the photo of the handkerchief, her eyes filling with tears as she whispered her father's name. Together they stared at the evidence of his final moments, hope and dread mingling in the quiet darkness of the room. Across Sand Rock, excitement spread with the sunrise. Townspeople gathered at the church lawn, clutching copies of the Gazette. Conversations buzzed with disbelief and hope. Some spoke of rallying another search effort. Others whispered prayers for the pastor's soul. At the cave, entrance deputies marked new evidence boundaries and fitted sensors to detect movement. Volunteers set up folding chairs and water coolers in anticipation of fresh announcements. And in the hush of that morning, as the sun climbed over the pines, the hidden truth of Hollow Rock Cave began to surface once more. Detective Marcus Caldwell arrives at the Jackson County Courthouse on a crisp morning, his breath visible in the cool hallway air. He carries the court order in a crisp manila envelope, bearing the seal of a superior judge who granted him permission to inspect all evidence related to case 1988-03-284. Caldwell's steps echo off the tiled floors as he makes his way past polished wood doors to the archives wing. He pauses briefly at a framed photograph of Sheriff Matthews, a stern portrait from 2 decades past, and steels himself for what he might find behind the heavy steel door-marked evidence storage. Inside the storage room, rows of lockers line each wall. The overhead fluorescent lights hum quietly, casting a clinical glare on numbered compartments. Caldwell approaches locker 23, the one containing Dr. Jenkins's recent entries. He unlocks it with a key that jingles in his gloved hand and pulls out 3 numbered evidence bags. The first bag holds the church PA recorder, its red recording light frozen in a slow blink. The second contains the pastor's robe, folded loosely and stained along the hem with darkened smears. The third bag secures the torn leather sermon satchel. It seemed carefully cut by Jenkins, so the contents remained intact. Caldwell lays each bag on a stainless steel table and closes the locker behind him. He lifts the PA recorder from its sealed bag and inspects the device. The casing is scuffed and dusty, but the record button appears untampered with. Caldwell places it into a portable player he has brought, silent for years until now. He lifts headphones to his ears and presses play. A hiss fills the small room before a chorus of distant voices emerges. Then Pastor Finch's calm voice offering final blessings. Suddenly the audio cuts to hushed footsteps. Then Finch's voice breaks with urgency as he utters 4 words that send a chill through Caldwell's spine. They know I saw. Help me. The tape ends on a single exhale. Caldwell removes his headphones and sets the recorder aside, his mind racing with questions about who they might be. Next, Caldwell reaches for the misfiled evidence from 1988 that had lain untouched for decades. He unlocks a second locker and retrieves a 4th bag containing a blood-spattered notebook. Its cover reads, "Sermon Notes" in faded ink. Caldwell flips it open and finds handwritten entries listing names paired with dates in precise columns. Each entry corresponds to a child who vanished in Sand Rock during the late 1970s and early 1980s. The margins bear cryptic annotations in the pastor's distinct script, words like safe, crossroads, and ceremony. He turns carefully through the pages, noting how some names are scored out while others are circled twice. The final item Caldwell examines is a tattered pocket Bible, its spine cracked and pages dog-eared. He opens to a ribbon marking passage, numbers scrawled in red ink. 3 verses underlined in Ezekiel, followed by a single line in Leviticus. Beside those verses the pastor has written, "Not faith, ritual." Caldwell runs a fingertip over the handwritten phrase and wonders what danger Finch had uncovered. The Bible pages are edged in dust, suggesting it lay hidden in darkness for decades. Caldwell takes meticulous notes on each margin marking and verse reference, cataloging them in his case file. Aware that he needs expert assistance, Caldwell places a call to Mariah Finch. He hesitates only momentarily before dialing her number at the University of Alabama. When she answers, he introduces himself with gentle firmness, explaining that he has uncovered new evidence central to her father's disappearance. Mariah's voice trembles as she listens, the years of unanswered questions echoing through her tone. Caldwell arranges to meet her later that afternoon at the county archives, a quiet room lined with newspapers and microfilm readers. As Mariah drives down Highway 77, she rehearses what she might say. For years, she combed through church bulletins and sermon transcripts, but never imagined her father's own notebook would contain coded clues. When she arrives, she finds Caldwell waiting by the oak conference table. He gestures to the spread of evidence before him: the tape, the notebook, and the Bible. Mariah's breath catches as she recognizes the battered leather of the recorder that once sat on her family's pulpit. She reaches out to touch the notebook, her fingers tracing the red ink annotations. Working together, Caldwell and Mariah begin to piece the puzzle. Mariah deciphers the coded margin notes by matching circled names to dates on the PA transcript. She realizes that each circled child's name aligns with a verse Finch underlined in the Bible. She flips to Ezekiel and reads aloud the underlined passages, verses that speak of blood at the sanctuary and the prohibition of profaning sacred spaces. Then she reads the Leviticus line about the binding of life to ritual. She looks up at Caldwell with wide eyes and says that her father was mapping out a series of ritual sites tied to those missing children. Caldwell pulls up a county ledger on his laptop and cross-references each date. He finds that every child listed in the notebook is recorded as an accidental death in the coroner's files. Caldwell's jaw tightens as he realizes those deaths were mischaracterized to conceal foul play. He radios for the assistant coroner, who arrives moments later to confirm that the files were indeed misfiled under cause of death, unspecified accident. Caldwell thanks the assistant and journals the correction so the records will be updated. The sense of urgency in the room intensifies. Mariah points to a series of annotations reading Crossroads Ritual, June 1988. She asks Caldwell if that could reference the Hollow Rock Cave site. Caldwell nods and explains that the cave's hidden side chamber likely served as one of those ritual locations. He pockets his phone and calls Simone Turner, instructing her to begin research on every missing child named in the notebook, cross-checking local archives and newspaper microfilm for any overlooked leads. As the late afternoon sun casts long shadows across the archives, Caldwell and Mariah gather their notes. They agree that the pattern Finch uncovered points to a clandestine network operating long before his death. Mariah tucks the Bible and notebook under her arm and rises. Caldwell hands her a file containing photocopies of each evidence item and a transcript of the PA tape. He tells her this is just the beginning and that together they will bring her father's persecutors to light. Before parting, Mariah thanks Caldwell for believing in her father's vision. She steps into the fading light outside and looks toward the distant ridge where Hollow Rock Cave is hidden. In her heart, she vows to follow every margin note and every verse until the full truth emerges. Caldwell watches her go, resolve hardening. He knows the path ahead will lead them into the darkest corners of Sandrock's history. But with the pastor's words echoing in his mind and Mariah's fierce determination at his side, he feels confident they can finally unmask the horrors behind the cave's cold sermon. Marcus Caldwell and Simone Turner convene in the dimly lit conference room of the sheriff's office. Evidence files and transcripts spread across the scarred oak table. Sunlight filters through narrow blinds, casting striped shadows on the scattered papers. Simone sifts through newspaper clippings and microfilm transcript from the Gazette archives, while Marcus opens county record books and computer databases. Their investigation hinges on the names Pastor Finch recorded in his notebook and the dates they correspond to. Each name is tied to a disappearance long ago, chalked up as an accidental death. Marcus inputs the names into the database, pulling up death certificates, coroner's reports, and property deeds. Simone cross-references the same names against archived parish records and local census rolls. Their combined research reveals a chilling pattern. The first name circled twice in the notebook is of a child named Clara Robbins, who vanished in March of 1979. Her death certificate lists cause of death as unknown trauma, filed by the coroner's office under the category of accidental fall. Marcus obtains photocopies of those original files and notes that the signature on the certificate matches that of Dr. Lowell Hayes, the county coroner at the time. Simone locates archived photographs of Clara's family in the Gazette. Her father's obituary mentions only a tragic accident. The absence of an autopsy report surprises Marcus until he finds a marginal note in the ledger indicating that the case was closed without further examination. He looks at Simone and quietly says, "These deaths were deliberately covered up." Simone points to the second name, Jonathan Carter, listed with an October 1981 date. Jonathan's official file similarly attributes his death to an accidental drowning at the river, 17 miles downstream. Yet Marcus discovers no coroner's notes on water toxicity or examination of his lungs. Instead, the ledger entry bears Hayes' signature and a hastily written filed stamp. Simone's eyes narrow as she notes the same pattern. Each child's files were signed off by Hayes, bypassing standard protocols. She photographs the original ledgers and sends them to her editor, knowing this is the breakthrough Sand Rock has been waiting for. Next, they examine property deeds for Hollow Rock Cave and surrounding land owned by the church. Marcus unearths a deed transfer from 1987 showing that two church deacons, Samuel Wright and Jeremiah Tucker, purchased adjacent acreage under the corporate name New Dawn Holdings. Simone locates corporate filings listing Wright and Tucker as directors of the holding company. Property survey maps reveal they commissioned engineers from a Nashville firm to install safety braces inside the cave passages, officially described as reinforcements to prevent collapse. Yet Marcus finds invoices for that work were paid in full, even though no such reinforcements were ever publicly noted. He cross-checks the engineers' reports and discovers their paperwork was signed off by the coroner's assistant, Hannah Brooks, as safety inspector. Simone tracks down Hannah Brooks, now long retired and living in a modest bungalow on the edge of town. In a quiet interview, Hannah confirms that she was ordered by Hayes to sign off on the cave reinforcement documents despite never inspecting the work. She recalls Hayes insisting the bills be paid promptly to secure the cave from prying eyes. When she pressed for details, she was threatened with professional ruin. Hannah's voice trembles as she recounts seeing Wright and Tucker repeatedly visit the cave at dusk, carrying equipment cases and moving with deliberate purpose. She provides sworn testimony that the deacons and the coroner were intimately involved in orchestrating each engineered collapse. Armed with Hannah's statement, Marcus and Simone assemble a timeline. Engineering contracts signed in 1987. The disappearances continuing until Finch's sermon in 1988 and subsequent cover-ups carried out under the pretense of cave stabilization. They overlay this timeline with the entries in Finch's notebook, noting that each circled name corresponds to a deed purchase or invoice date. Simone drafts an expose entitled Church Leaders and County Coroner Linked to 28 years of Missing Children, citing ledger entries, death certificates, and Hannah's testimony. Marcus prepares affidavits outlining probable cause to search Deacon Wright's and Deacon Tucker's homes, as well as Coroner Hayes' former office. The magnitude of their findings presses heavily on both investigator and reporter. Simone wonders aloud how a small community could be so thoroughly penetrated by a secret network. Marcus, studying the property survey maps, reflects on how deeply embedded the conspiracy was. Financial records, legal filings, and official documents all manipulated to mask the truth. He realizes their confrontation will not only expose past horrors, but challenge the faith of the congregation that revered Finch's killers. Yet he also feels resolute that no institution, however sacred, can place itself above justice. That evening, Marcus sits at his desk and drafts the warrant applications. Each page meticulously details the evidence. Multiple death certificates signed by Hayes, corporate filings showing Wright and Tucker's financial ties, Hannah Brooks's sworn statement, and Finch's margins recording ritual sites. He secures preliminary approval from the district attorney, who agrees the case merits immediate action. Simone typewrites her final draft, ready to publish once the arrests are made. She emails her editor and requests extra press run to accommodate anticipated demand. Late into the night, the sheriff's office lab closes its doors and the lights dim. Marcus and Simone leave together under a canopy of stars, their footsteps echoing on the quiet sidewalk. They share a brief look of mutual determination, knowing the next day will bring subpoenas, search warrants, and the unmasking of individuals once celebrated as pillars of faith. For the first time in decades, the children named in Finch's notebook may receive the justice denied to them in life. And the darkness within Hollow Rock Cave may finally be brought into the light. A pale dawn light filters through the pines on a humid summer morning as Sheriff's Deputy Marcus Caldwell stands at the heart of a coordinated operation to bring long-hidden evil into the light. At exactly 6 o'clock, deputies move in on the rural homesteads of Samuel Wright and Jeremiah Tucker. Wright's farmhouse sits at the edge of soybean field, its sagging porch hinting at decades of quiet respectability. Tucker's home, a tidy brick bungalow 2 miles down the road, has wind chimes tinkling in the morning breeze. In unison, teams of uniformed officers approach both properties, badges gleaming and paperwork in hand. The air vibrates with tension as Caldwell watches through binoculars, conscious that every second brings them closer to answers and closer to danger. Inside Wright's farmhouse, the atmosphere is startled disbelief. Wright, dressed in a rumpled suit that still bears the sheen of Sunday service, steps into the foyer flanked by 2 deputies. He blinks at the warrant, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for breath. Wright protests that he was fulfilling his duties to the church, pointing to his deacon's pin, but the officers are unmoved. In the living room, evidence technicians photograph mounted bills of sale for cave reinforcement projects and catalog ledger pages bearing Wright's signature. By the time Wright is handcuffed, the sun has crept above the treetops. At Tucker's home, Jeremiah sits at the kitchen table, hands trembling around a chipped mug of coffee. He, too, is taken into custody. His calm facade dissolves when confronted with bank records showing payment for engineering permits and documents revealing his role in bribing engineers to seal off passages in Hollow Rock Cave. Tucker offers no coherent defense, muttering excuses about preserving the cave for worship retreats. His voice catches when he realizes his wife and teenage daughter watch from the doorway, confusion and shame etched on their faces. Meanwhile, a third team arrives at the retired office of Dr. Lowell Hayes. The former coroner now lives alone in a small bungalow. He answers the door in pajamas, eyes wide behind thick spectacles. When Caldwell reads the charges, Hayes sinks to a chair, hands clasping the doorframe as though the walls might collapse. He claims he signed certificates under duress, that Wright and Tucker held sway over him. Officers place him in handcuffs with surprising gentleness, mindful of his age and fragile health. As arrests are made, Caldwell leads a team of forensic specialists to Hollow Rock Cave. They descend the ravine to the sinkhole entrance discovered 2 months earlier, where a temporary scaffold of metal beams and planks now stands. Caldwell steps beneath the platform, the damp air greeting him like a cold whisper. He shines his flashlight down the narrow shaft, noting fresh marks on the stone walls where hidden supports were removed. A demolition crew clears cobwebs of earth until the original side chamber yawns open at last. Inside the chamber, forensic technicians work under Caldwell's direction. They document every detail of the bone and feather altar uncovered by Dr. Jenkins, now partially exposed by careful excavation. Human skeletal remains lie arranged in concentric patterns, as if propped around the altar in a grotesque parody of church pews. Caldwell feels his stomach churn at the sight of tiny bones he recognizes from missing children photographs. He drapes numbered evidence tags on fragments of bone and feathers, instructing technicians to package them with sterile precision. At the far edge of the chamber, beneath a loose rock, lies Alistair Finch's battered Bible, its spine crushed and pages stained. Next to it sits the PA recorder, caught on a tangle of roots and grit, still humming faintly on its final recording. Caldwell gingerly lifts the recorder, its last message already cataloged, but now physically tethered to its place in the earth. He passes the Bible to a forensic anthropologist who places it in a protective box. Every movement is deliberate, governed by a determination to preserve the pastor's last stand against darkness. Back on the surface, reporters cluster behind yellow tape. Simone Turner arrives moments after Caldwell emerges, her camera operator trained on him as he carries the recorder toward the light. Simone's voice trembles with controlled excitement as she asks for comment. Caldwell, sweat glistening on his forehead, simply says that justice has been served. He confirms the identities of Wright, Tucker, and Hayes, and describes the ritual chamber found in the depths of Hollow Rock Cave. The broadcast cuts live to the Gazette's online feed. Images of the altar and skeletal remains flashing across screens worldwide. That evening, the community gathers at New Dawn Baptist Church for a candlelight vigil. Rows of white folding chairs face the empty pulpit draped in black velvet. Evelyn and Mariah Finch arrive hand in hand, each carrying a single taper candle. As dusk falls, the congregation lights their own candles, bringing a soft glow to the wooden pews. Evelyn steps forward and places her candle in a brass holder beneath the pulpit, followed by Mariah's small flame. One by one, 28 more candles are set, each representing a child whose life was stolen from Sandrock. The sanctuary fills with warm light and the silent weight of collective grief and relief.